What I find really intriguing about Atlas is the very bottom-up, relatively democratic process that you find at work as compared with what you'd find in a corporation. So I think, so what would appear highly inefficient from a corporate perspective, because time is money, turns out to be highly effective as a way of getting discoveries. The creation of the transistor in 47, I think, is a very interesting story. AT&T was looking very actively for a replacement of thermionic valves. And they produced this very first transistor, I think it was in 47. It took AT&T 6 months to even start thinking about what they could do with this stuff. I think it was in 48, they held a meeting with potential licensees. There was something like 30 or 40 firms that attended, half of which were interested in thermionic valves. Within a few years of that, all the ones that had seen the transistor as a replacement for thermionic valves had moved on and were either out of business or were doing other things. It was the ones that had seen transistor as having other possibilities that picked up the ball and ran with it. It is this non-goal-directed way of looking at research, which I think was lost in the subsequent decades as everybody started focusing and saying, well, what can I do with this? How does it add value? And of course, driving this was this idea that you should not waste. So we're really back to the question of how do you view waste? In my last chapter, I'm saying actually you have to use options thinking to understand this, because unless you have an options perspective, from a strictly net present value perspective, this will look like waste. And so I think it raises some very big policy issues as to how basic science is conducted. One of Marcus's colleagues, Timo Santalainen, had come into Atlas some years before as a management consultant. And he'd gone in on the assumption that this kind of organization could do with a bit of strategy, could do with a bit of thinking in a more structured way. It didn't quite work out that way. Timo came out of this with the realization that actually perhaps managers had more to learn from the way that Atlas was organized than Atlas had to learn from the way that management was organized. A biologist friend of mine points out that when a cod spawns, a cod produces 2 million eggs, of which 2 eggs become cod. The rest goes back into the ecosystem as nutrients. So what looks like waste from a strictly project management point of view may actually be very productive from an innovational point of view. And that's the distinction we need to make.